Hello and welcome to the Change Gang podcast with me, your host, Laura Ordile. I'm here to help you hold on to your sanity and your soul as you move through big change. I'm here to guide you from frustration to flow in your life, bridging the practical and the woo, just for you. Let's go. All right, welcome to the week, Change Gang. I have the amazing Ben Kelly back with me from Horwich Hypnotherapy. We had a lovely conversation about one side of things, and you can hear that actually on the Thursday edition under Triumphing Over Trauma on the Change Gang. And I wanted to have him back because there was some more that I wanted to dig out of him. So thanks for coming and being back with me, Ben. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me back. It's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. So in the conversation kind of off of the podcast, in some of the conversation that we had, I loved one of the things that you told me about your background and something that you said, because I really feel like it's an interesting comment, but you told me that you were fortunate enough to have been made redundant from your job, which led you down this path. Some people would go, what? What do you mean fortunate enough? I really feel into that and love that comment. So you want to talk a little bit about that journey and tell me a little bit about how it kind of led to where you are now?
I'd been playing around with this stuff for quite a long time. I'd never really done very much for money. I'd had some money paid to me for meditation sessions and the likes over the years, but really I'd only ever done stuff to further my own practices or to almost pay back what I'd been learning and being taught. I knew I wanted to do something that met with who I was, who I wanted to be. At the time I was fitting electric meters for a living. And yeah, there was a massive restructuring of the company. I was offered redundancy. It was enough to clear my outstanding debts. And so I said to my partner, I'm gonna take it and I'm not gonna have a real job anymore. And it was kind of sketchy to start with. I borrowed some money from my parents and took some sort of formal hypnotherapy qualifications. I started off with a wonderful company over here called Clifton Practice, who they taught me one quite sort of narrow system working. But that was enough for me to have the confidence to start charging and start setting this all up. One of the best things that they did for me was they taught me, big fancy term, but psychoeducation.
Yeah.
Just teaching people what's going on, how it's working in their brain. And so a lot of my earliest focus is around that because I already had some comfort in giving suggestion and leading people into trance. I'd covered those bases a little bit already, but then helping people to understand what the hell was going on with them. And for me, that was a big learning curve. I didn't really know very much about that. So focusing more on like the art of the pre-talk. As I've learned over the years, as much change can really be made in a good pre-talk at times as in hypnosis. Like you say about, I was fortunate enough to be made redundant. Well, it's just a perspective, isn't it? I knew other people that took that redundancy begrudgingly, whereas I future paced where I'd want to be. And yeah, it was scary, but I also knew that at that moment, it was either do what I wanted or put myself back into a safe position. And so I framed it right. And I think that's what we're always doing, isn't it? When we're talking to people or when we're doing our work, we're shifting your frame, shifting how you're seeing it. I think I said to you last time, all about your experience, all about their experience. And so my experience of going into redundancy was a happy, a very grateful experience. I'd had some personal breakthroughs using the earlier versions of my work through breath work, through trance work. I'd let go of some earlier thoughts about myself, things that had held me back and limiting beliefs. And then it was let's just do it.
And I love that because we do live in perspective, and sometimes even just that little conversation, when you talk about pre-talk, that's the conversation that you have ahead of time with your clients, with the people that you're working with, to kind of decide together the direction that you're going and to clarify things. And would that be how you would describe that?
Absolutely. And to normalize some language, to normalize some terminology, and often, there is an education side to it. If you come in because you have phobia, or you come in because you have trauma, or whatever it might be, you don't necessarily have any clue as to why this is happening. You don't have any, trauma and phobias and the likes are things that didn't get processed right. So even in that pre-talk, helping someone to truly know, hell, all we're going to do is help you to reprocess this from a safe state. The heightened cortisol, the heightened stress levels meant that it got stuck rather than going into long-term memory like it was meant to. So let's just reprocess it in this calm, comfortable place so that it can just go away like it's meant to, like it was always meant to.
Exactly. And you used another term that I'm going to ask you to share what that meant. You used when you were made redundant and you lost that job, or were given the gift of moving on from it, I should say. When that happened, you said you future paced yourself. So you want to explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, thank you. So I think last time we spoke, I mentioned to you that I think we exist in the past, the present, and the future. And, we exist now, but our past brought us here. All of those previous nows got us here. But then our brain is a very predictive thing. It's taking the past to then look forward and predict for the future. And so when we're talking about future pacing, we're talking about seeing ourselves in that state. Laura, if I was helping you with confidence, then there's no point just trying to prove to you that now you're confident. It'd be much more about having you see 6 months, a year down the line, you being confident, or seeing you walking out of that meeting or that interview full of that confidence, seeing yourself actually enacting it, because that way, your brain has points of reference so that it can feel safe. We talk a lot in hypnosis and the likes about the brain really not being able to tell the difference between imagination and reality. And so what we're doing is we're using imagined or semi-imagined future state to show the brain that that's going to be safe, or even beyond safe, that's going to be fantastic. And when we can do that, then the brain can just relax. It can not then use an old predictive model to do. Your brain's always future pacing. If you have somebody that at your work that you constantly butt heads with, then if you've got to see that person later, your brain is going to future pace. Oh God, I'm going to butt heads with that person. And so your brain's always doing it. We just want to do it. I think most of what we're doing is just hijacking natural systems.
Yeah, that's true.
And so our
That's
brain knows that we exist in the past, the present, and the future. So we just want to make sure that we're really hijacking the past to review it in a productive way. It's a bit like timeline therapy. I love a bit of timeline therapy. Sending people back to take on the positive or productive learnings that maybe they didn't take back then. Because potentially if they'd taken those learnings back then, they wouldn't be stuck in the now. And then we can go and again take that learning from back then to now and then to the future. And so I spent some time imagining, imagining the office, imagining the logos and the most basic version of what I could imagine back then of what this could look like, to go and show my brain, hey, this is safe. This is something that we want to proceed into. If you think of the stress model and, we have our acute and chronic stress. And so if we think of it, redundancy can be quite a chronically stressful thing. Mm-hmm. And so if we've got chronic stress, that would be an inhibitor to our movement forward. It would be, it'd cause us to want to withdraw. So that would have forced me into the safe route. Whereas when I turned it into an acute thing, I could see myself on the other side of it. So I knew that how I like to think of it is acute versus chronic is about your opponent. So if you've got infinite opponent, it's like when we used to fight, when we used to do martial arts when I was younger. If you couldn't imagine beating that person, if you couldn't imagine winning that fight, then the you that went into that fight, he was already chronically stressed by it. Whereas if you imagined sailing through it, you know, doing well. You imagined yourself on the other side of it, even just alive. Yeah. Just knowing that there was an end to it. Then you made it finite. Yeah. You made it that you knew you could get through that thing. And so then how we use cortisol, how our body uses cortisol is totally different. You know, then it's used as a motivator and it's used to drive us forward. It allows us to burn our fat stores. It knows that we're in the here and now fight rather than we're waiting for some monster coming over the hill. So that idea of future pacing is just showing us that we made it through. I don't know that I really knew that that's what I was doing, but that is what I was doing back then. And just, yeah, creating an idea that, hey, this is going to work. Imagine it working. Imagine it having worked. Imagine you know, in my early days, I used to say, right, I'll be good when I got 5 clients. If I got 5 clients a week, then I'll be able to just about pay for things. And then started getting 5 clients a lot sooner because I'd said in a year, I need to have 5 clients a week. And then in a few months, I had 5 clients a week. So I was like, stuff that, right? Within the year, I want 10 clients a week. So then I got to about that year mark, and I think I was sort of hitting probably about 12, 13 clients a week, which is actually, I mean, fair enough compared to my old job. It's still only part-time hours. But at that point, I could see that, hell, you know, I'm past that hump. And so then it's, okay, well, what's a stretch target? So it's okay, well, within 18 months, I want to be at 15. And so actually doing that, because every time I was putting myself forward and seeing myself doing that, so it's creating a belief in yourself that you can do it. Seeing yourself there with those tools, seeing yourself there with that outcome. It doesn't mean, and I'm not suggesting for a second, well, we manifest it, don't get me wrong, but we're manifesting the drive to do it. We're manifesting the here and now version of us that can move through it. You know, even through just our chemistry, through our mindset. And so I think that's really what I meant when I said future paced it. It's just, taking taking ourselves into that future state to see some level of victory or at least some level of safety that we can then move forward into.
Well, and something you said, I think it's funny because it's so interesting how the words that we use can sometimes lean somebody into something or lean somebody away from something. But you said it's not necessarily manifesting. Although, if you look at the dynamics of what some people would call manifesting, it's very similar. It's bringing about what we want in our life in a way that we do it. And I know some people will say, oh, manifesting is, woo-woo, and they're just thinking about it and everything. But when I think about, or when I talk about manifesting, it is in the action of creation. It's going forward with what you want to be doing in your life and making sure that you're because we are creating from our minds in exactly the way that you said. We're creating and allowing those things to kind of be in play and to draw those things into our life. And I believe that we're working with the universe, the energy that's out there, however you want to term it, to do the things that we're creating. I think our mind is so incredibly powerful in this world that we live in this universe that we live in, that we are doing those things. You can disagree. It's okay if you want to. But I think it's working with that energy of mind, of universe, of all of that to move forward in the way that we want to. But you're not going to get anything by sitting around imagining on the couch, if that's the way that you kind of mean that. That's not how our world works. And I always tell people it's funny because I do live in the woo world too. And they're like, well, I'm just waiting for a sign to move forward, or I'm just waiting for a sign. And I'm like, you know what? The universe is sitting next to you waiting too then, because it's not going to do anything until you do something. You're not going to have anything happen in your life until you're out there moving around doing the things that you need to do. I think it's so funny that the perspective of, but I'm finding, I guess for me, I'm finding the more people try to separate something, the more it comes together, because the way that you're learning about it is like, oh, that sounds just like this, or that sounds just like this. And it's just a different word for some of the same things that we do. But I think future pacing is super important in the work that we do, because when you are doing it under hypnosis, when you are leading someone to be able to see themselves as confident, maybe they're seeing themselves as speaking in front of a situation, feeling good about it, having the people clapping when they're done, going through a scenario lets your physical body and your subconscious and all of that, have a recognition of that safety that you talked about. Have a recognition of, oh, that feels good. It's okay to go in that direction. We can do that, because it does let your mind know it's safe. And again, that's prime directive of our subconscious, is to keep us safe.
That's everything that gets in the way of us doing what we want is around safety, isn't it? Everything is, if you're not doing that, somewhere stored away is an idea of don't do that because.
Right.
So regarding your woo idea, which I'm not all against the woo. I like me a bit of woo. I do. But I also constantly have to understand it. This is something that's plagued me throughout my whole life, is the need to understand stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big fan of McGilchrist's work on the divided brain, his book, The Mastering Emissary. Really, really interesting take on how sort of one side of the brain is more interested in the here and now, and one side of the brain is more interested in, like, more, I think of it like the timeline, of like mapped predictions from past events and all of that. And so I think what we've got is what we're having as our experience is all based on what we've mapped. And, our focus, how we're focusing on everything, is all dependent on value, on what our brain is seeing as value from what it's learned in the past, like a positive or a negative value. And so what I always like to think of, and this one is probably about as woo as I get, but what I often like to ask people this question, and it's a bit of a weird question, but it kind of makes my point. Until I ask you, it won't be there. But if I ask you, in your vision, where is your nose? Well, you couldn't see it until I've asked, and then you went and found it.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
Yeah. Okay. So in the same way as actually, so many things about our vision or about our experience is or isn't there. If you notice something for long enough, you'll stop noticing it. A bit like an annoying sound, like if a house alarm's going off near you, eventually you'll only notice it maybe even through its absence.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And so that, and I'm sure that I'm not perfectly correct in this, but it's just, in my experience, the way I like to think of it is, this is my mind. Yeah. In the same way as, you're in your mind. Your mind has a computer screen in front of you right now where I'm hearing, but we take for granted that this is life, that this is reality. It's not. This is our mind. And so what we're seeing of value, so therefore what our brain is throwing up for us to focus on in our mind, is all based on those previous and those future predictions. So within your manifestations or any of that, because I'm not decrying it in any way, but what I think is, if I'm not looking for that thing, if I'm not seeing that thing as a possibility or as a valuable idea, then my brain is just going to discount that information.
True.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. There's so much stuff that there's more that we don't notice than we do. And it's like they always say, when you go and you buy that car, then all of a sudden now, even though you didn't see it before, now you see that car everywhere because your attention was brought to it. And now you can see it, even though you didn't the day before or the week before. I think attention and awareness are incredible. And I've been talking a lot about awareness, and that simply bringing awareness to something changes everything. It changes everything going forward. One of the things I'm curious about, and I would love for you, because you spoke about timeline, and I think timeline is great because it does take you in the future. And you mentioned going into the past and bringing forward the lessons that maybe you didn't bring forward before. So do you want to talk for a second to explain to people, maybe they were like, well, how do you do that? What does that mean in the way that you're talking about it?
So how you do it is potentially you contact a professional, but otherwise what we do in timeline is, okay, so I'll talk you through it. It's just an idea. It's easier for me to talk you through it. Someone else can even do it as they're listening. Is I'd ask you, so if you were to get a sense of where the past was, Laura, which way would you point? Physically, where would you point to the past right now?
Behind me.
Oh, pretty common, but not everyone points that way. If I asked you where the future was, where would you point?
Well, I would say, so it's interesting because I have two, but it would be forward.
Okay. What was the other one?
Well, if I am thinking of a line or something, the past would be to the left And the future would be to the right.
That's often also a common one. And so then if I asked you point at where here and now is, where would you point?
Where I am.
Okay, cool. So then we see that you're kind of orientated in the here and now. There's some people kind of live in the past, some people kind of live in the future. So it's just getting these orientations straight away. And so, just for people that are listening, side and side is kind of common. Hell, diagonals, or back, but over there for the future. I've seen it all, right? And then what we do is we have you, it's one of my biggest words is imagine, right? So we'd have you close your eyes and we'd have you imagine that timeline. We'd have you imagine being on that timeline, as you're in the here and now. So we'd imagine you starting in the here and now, floating up. Generally what we do is we then look at the past and the future. We work out if they look bright or dark. And then we mess around a little bit. If the future doesn't look straight or the future doesn't look flat, we'll start to mess around with that until it feels more comfortable. Because all we care about, as I've said quite a few times in any of this, is just your experience. But then, because we've got some idea of why we're going on your timeline. Now, I think of this timeline a little bit like a guitar string personally. As in, so there's different things. Like if this was your timeline of happy event, they might have all struck the same sort of chord throughout your life, yeah?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, whereas if it was your timeline of traumatic event, they might have struck a very different chord all the way along.
Makes sense.
And so I always like us to know why we're doing this, because before we do that, then we can make sure that we're associated to it enough. Okay. But then we imagine floating back along that timeline of those events all the way back to the very first time it ever happened. And we're above it, right? As we're imagining it, as you're going back along it, you're above it. And so that's creating what we'd call a dissociation, as in it's not you. Whereas if I just ask you to go and remember it, that could be far too much.
You're just being observed. You're the observer.
Absolutely, yeah. Creating that separation, that safety. And then through that safety, through that perspective, which is kind of how we started this whole conversation anyway, was about perspectives, is kind of what did you miss? What did you miss that would be useful to you right now? What positive or productive learning can you take? And now these can be very widely spread. I'll hear a lot of people saying, you know what, because we have you usually talk to us throughout it all. Often people say, you know what, it wasn't my fault. Or, you know what, I didn't know better back then. Okay, and what can you take now? Okay, well, I wasn't a bad, that's amazing, yeah? Yeah, and then whatever that useful learning that you needed, then, there's other things we'll do, but basically what we're going to do is then come back through every time that string was struck, or the biggest times, the most resonant times it was struck, and go and let that version of that new learning until you kind of bring it all the way back along your timeline into your present moment. And then you can bring it all the way back. I did this a while back. A really nice lady. She'd been a bit like we've spoken about in the past about, we're kind of often the last ditch attempt at things. And she said, I feel like I've just had 6 months of counseling in an hour.
I love that.
Yeah, you resolved it in your own mind. A counselor is only, or any sort of talking therapist, they're only ever meant to be trying to help you arrive at your own conclusion. Well, she arrived at her own conclusion of how she reviewed that differently. And then she got to bring it all the way back through all those other states of being her, all of those other experiences. And then, I think we've spoken in the past as well. I mentioned memory reconsolidation, the Bruce Ecker stuff. And so this is really the association to start with. And all these sorts of works, what we're really doing is we're associating, and then we're dissociating, and then we're taking on a new learning. And then we're bringing that new learning back through time, often all the way into the future. And then we're reassociating you back to the here and now with all that new learning. And that's kind of opening up that read-write file of dumping in all the new information. And this is, even if you think of simple things like when we do the rewind technique, all you're doing is you're dumping in so much information that didn't exist in the original file, the original memory, that it forces it to be reprocessed.
Yeah.
That's true. So all we're doing in this is we're creating an experience where you can reprocess with a new learning all those old events, just in a very fast, paced session. And in the end, going nearer your woo for a minute, the only time is now, isn't it? It all exists in this moment. The past we can only access through memory. The future we can only access through imagination. Any future will only be now. Any past was only now. And so we can technically fix pretty much all of it around our experience in now. Kind of cool, really.
It is really cool. It is very cool. People might go, well, how does that happen? Well, because your subconscious has all of the information from your entire life. Everything is in there. It might be buried, if we use the analogy of the hard drive or the computer again, it's in the file, that's in the file, that's in the file, that's in the file, and it's way down in there, but it's there. And when you go and you access that information, it is able to be seen, and then it changes the whole perspective of the situation. Not to mention coming from a person who's lived a life and has a different perspective. So when you go back and you look at something, it's like, oh, okay. And just like you might do for a friend, you have a different heart for that version of you in that moment. You're not the person that is experiencing. When you look at something, it might not be that you feel, oh, that was just that. You don't need to feel guilty about that or ashamed of that, or it wasn't your fault, or just like you said. And so when you're able to pull that emotion and change it and shift it and pull it forward, oh my goodness. And it lets you just see things that were like, I didn't even realize that's actually what happened.
You're so narrow, you're so focused in. And if you're talking, this is something that I found a lot, especially with people with low self-esteem, low self-worth. If we check, how would you feel if someone spoke about your best friend like that? Christ, that's not going to be acceptable, right? So actually then when they're dissociated from themselves, when they're taken away from themselves, when they can see themselves from that floating above perspective or that third person perspective, then often they can see themselves in the same way as they would see that friend for a minute. And all of a sudden the perspective shift allows them to see a wider angle. They're not in it. They're not holding on to all those learning. And that can be so thoroughly, holistically beneficial.
Yes, definitely. I agree with you so much right there. And it is about the whole person at that point, because it changes the whole person. It changes the mentality. It changes the emotional base. It changes you physically. And you can literally see sometimes people release in their body something that they've held on to for 25, 50 years. And to have that release is like, oh my goodness. They didn't even realize that was something that was being held in there. Now they're just like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. My gosh, I could sit here and talk to you forever, Ben. And I'm sorry, I won't keep you here forever, but I want you to.
An absolute pleasure.
I want you to talk for just a second, if you don't mind, because you have some incredible things that you're creating and moving in a direction. You do help everyone. And I love that you say my niche is for the people that need help, or niche. You could say niche for the people that need help. That's me at Horwich Hypnotherapy. And you do in person and online. And I love that, so that you are able to open and be available to such a wider audience. But you also are creating some work. You're publishing self-care manual that's going to be coming out. And you're also doing some work under a new version of yourself called Changeworks, where you're going to go in and do some educating. So if you have just a minute to talk about, in a nutshell, a little bit about both of those, I'd love for you to share.
Okay, so the self-care manual is the Changeworks manual. It's version 1 in circulation as the handout for the Changeworks talks, but it was created pretty quickly. It all came around. I was given an opportunity to go and talk to the patients of a psychiatric unit, which was a very, very rewarding experience. I created the first version of it, I don't know, in sort of a week. And then afterwards I looked at it and it was like, this doesn't represent what I'm trying to say. And so then it's been rewritten. I think it's about 50 pages long. It was only like 17 pages, the first one. But I'm kind of just creating like a pre-talk in a book.
Yeah.
And so then that goes with Changeworks, which is my cheesy idea of it. I do like a cheesy term. It's therapy light. It's the idea of going in and creating a therapy experience or a therapeutic experience in corporations, in businesses, in charities, where people who maybe either not can't, but won't, or don't even know that they should get some help can be around a wellness, a well-being talk that really is not all just about niceties. It's about the realities of things, and within it, about creating experiences throughout. It's about giving people tools and techniques and having the potential of a huge change experience all within 90 minutes. So it's kind of what I've been building in here over the last few years on the back of having been in quite large businesses in the past teaching meditations. And so it's just ramping that up, getting in front of groups of people in quite an open way. It's quite an open structured session where people can throw out their ideas and we can talk through it. We can work through it, but then we can give people here and now techniques and teach them future pacing. We can teach them everything to become self-managing, because that's really what I'm passionate about with everyone that comes in here. Is, it's a horrible business structure I have here. I always say to people, I want as little of your business as I can have. I want to teach you as much as I can give you in as short a space of time, so that you can go and do it yourself. So it's going to do that in front of groups.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that you're going to do that and kind of, again, expand the education, bring it out and normalize it even more and make it important for people to be aware of. I love that.
Absolutely.
That you're doing it.
Absolutely.
Let people know where they can find you, Ben.
HorwichHypnotherapy.com is the easiest way. So that's HORWICH hypnotherapy.com is the easiest way to find me at the moment. Change-works.co.uk is a really ropey website at the moment, I'll be honest. It's up and coming. But then beyond there, I hope to be found on this podcast in the future as well, as it's been such a pleasure to talk. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for going along with me too. Have a great day. And thanks, Change Gang, for being with us. And I hope to meet you right here, same time next week. Ciao. I hope today's episode was interesting to you in some way and fun. If so, hey, find someone to share it with. Maybe they need to hear it too, or maybe they'll just enjoy it. If you'd like, go ahead and grab my tips on supercharging your success. It includes a free short meditation to do just that. You can find that at bit.ly/supercharge your success. Until next time, happy day.